Welcome to Whispers of Crime, where dark secrets and mysterious cases slowly unravel. Each story here is a journey into the shadows of the human soul, where anyone can become the predator or the prey. Are you ready to discover the chilling climax waiting at the end of the road? In a shadowy corner of Verdun City, where the streetlights barely pierced the darkness of narrow alleys, Detective Nate Wilkins stepped onto the scene. This was the fourth time this month, another mysterious case. The victim this time was no different from the others. The body lay motionless in a rundown apartment, but there was something different. A chill ran down his spine. The empty eyes, like a piece of the soul, had vanished. Chief Donovan was already standing by the door. He turned to Wilkins with a hopeless expression. "You had to come," he said, his voice raspy, as if trying to contain his anger. Wilkins didn't reply immediately. He knelt down by the body, a man in his 30s. There were no signs of struggle. But what caught Wilkins' attention were the victim's hands. They had been brutally severed. "There's not much to go on. But we can't let this go on any longer, Wilkins," Donovan reminded him. "The public is scared. This is the fourth in a series. Not enough to connect them yet, but this guy knows how to play cat and mouse," Wilkins replied, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of the room. Everything appeared normal, except his eyes stopped on a small detail. A folded piece of paper under the table next to the bed. No one else had noticed it. Carefully, Wilkins slid on his gloves, picked up the note, and opened it. A simple but haunting message. This one didn't deserve hands. Wilkins clenched the note. Once again, the killer had left a small trace, as if taunting him. This felt too familiar, too calculated, and clearly, the murderer wanted something more than just to kill. Wilkins had endured sleepless nights, not because of the case, but because of his own mind. His past was like a ghost lurking in the shadows. Dark dreams, screams, and a faceless figure haunted him night after night. He sat in his office, reports from the crime scene stacked in front of him. His trembling hand accidentally knocked his coffee cup to the floor. The sound of it shattering jolted him back from his foggy thoughts. "Focus, Nate," he muttered to himself. But how could he focus when every lead seemed to go nowhere? A knock on the door interrupted him. The door opened, and Claire, his colleague and the only person he trusted, stepped inside. "Nate, we found this in the third apartment," she said, placing a torn gray piece of cloth, stained with dried blood, on the table. "Where's this from?" Wilkins asked, frowning. "We're not sure yet, but this is the only trace that's different from the other cases," Claire said, her eyes flashing with a hint of concern. "And this doesn't match the previous scenes." Wilkins picked up the piece of cloth. There was something strange about the material, a cold sensation spreading as he touched it. "We're dealing with someone who's not just killing, they're sending a message." Claire nodded, but her eyes hinted at something more. Wilkins knew she was worried about him, perhaps because she understood his past better than anyone else. But she said nothing more, leaving him with the fabric and his troubled thoughts. Night had swallowed the city, cars gliding by like invisible ghosts. Wilkins returned to his apartment, not to rest but to analyze the case. He spent every minute searching for any clue he might have missed. In the dead of night, a call from Claire broke the silence. "Nate, I just got new information about the third victim. It looks like he was connected to some secret organization." A wave of tension swept through Wilkins. What organization? "Not much is clear yet, but it seems like an underground group involved in trafficking body parts, and our victim may have been involved." Wilkins stayed silent for a moment. This changed everything. The killer wasn't just targeting random people, he was hunting those tied to something much darker. "We need to dig deeper," Wilkins said, his voice tight. "This guy isn't just killing for fun. He has a plan. A purpose." Claire agreed, but deep down, Wilkins knew this case had many layers left to unravel. And as he delved deeper, his own past was starting to rise like a nightmare he couldn't escape. That night, Wilkins lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The street noises outside did nothing to ease his tension. The recent crime scenes replayed in his mind like a grim mosaic, each piece seemingly unrelated yet connected by something just out of reach. He sat up, his hand brushing over the messy stack of files on the table. A photo caught his eye. Severed hands, fingers splayed. His heart raced. Memories of his dark past flooded back, vivid images from his youth when he first confronted brutal death. Old wounds that had never fully healed began to crack open, threatening to unleash a flood of nightmares. The sudden ringing of his phone shattered the silence. It was Claire. "Wilkins, I think you need to come to the new crime scene immediately. We've found something. Something I can't explain," she said, her voice filled with worry. That was all Wilkins needed to hear. He rushed out of his apartment, the night swallowing him as his car sped through the deserted streets of Verdun. He was too familiar with drives like this, where the darkness not only enveloped the city but also seemed to close in around him. When he arrived at the scene, Claire was waiting by the door. "You need to see this," she said, leading him into the latest apartment. The flickering lights created an unsettling, chaotic atmosphere. Wilkins stepped inside, and as soon as his eyes landed on the wall before him, he couldn't hide his shock. The wall was covered with small pieces of paper, each one containing cryptic messages. It seemed the killer had begun playing a psychological game with them. At the top of the wall, scrawled in large letters written in blood, were the chilling words, "You will never find your hands." A cold shiver ran down Wilkins' spine. Clearly, this killer knew more about him than he could have ever imagined. He was being hunted, just as much as he was hunting the killer. Wilkins couldn't sleep that night. His eyes scanned every tiny detail in the crime scene photos. He knew the killer wasn't just murdering, he was sending a message. But what disturbed Wilkins most was that the message seemed directed at him. Claire had sent him a detailed report about the latest victim's background. Once again, there was a connection to an underground organization that had long been rumored, but was rarely spoken of in Verdun. The Syndicate. It was a criminal group involved in human organ and body part trafficking. The previous deaths, the scattered clues, now started to form a clearer picture. The killer wasn't just a random murderer. He was a vigilante, hunting down everyone connected to that dark network. But the question remained, why was Wilkins being targeted? And why the focus on the severed hands? Wilkins couldn't help but wonder if his past was somehow tied to this case. His obsession with old wounds became more apparent by the day. Sometimes he wasn't sure if he could keep his mind together under the weight of it all. Just then a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Wilkins, we've got a witness." Claire's voice came from outside. He stood up, trying to remain composed. A witness? This could be the breakthrough they were waiting for. But deep down, Wilkins knew that things might get far more complicated. Wilkins entered the interrogation room, where a man sat slumped over the table, looking exhausted. His bloodshot eyes suggested he hadn't slept in days. Claire stood nearby, quietly briefing Wilkins on the situation. "He's the manager of the building where the latest victim lived. He says he saw someone lurking around the night of the murder," Claire whispered. Wilkins sat down across from the witness. "I need you to tell me everything, in as much detail as possible. Don't leave anything out." The man swallowed hard, fear evident in his eyes. I'm not sure about everything. It was so dark that night. But I remember, there was someone, a tall man wearing a black coat, standing by the door. When I tried to get closer, he disappeared into the shadows." "Did you see his face?" Wilkins asked, trying to keep his impatience in check. The man shook his head. "No, not clearly. But there was something. He was holding something, like a bag." Wilkins paused, thinking, a bag? Could that be where the severed hands were kept? But why would the killer keep them? "I don't know anything else. I just know that man wasn't normal. There was something very sick about him," the witness finished, his voice trembling. Wilkins couldn't stop thinking about the man's words. A sick individual. But was this person searching for something, or was he simply spreading terror for the sake of it? Wilkins sat still in his office, the dim light casting shadows around him. The witness's words echoed in his mind. He's not a normal person. The mysterious bag and the image of the severed hands spun endlessly in Wilkins' thoughts. What made this killer different? He knew this wasn't just a typical murder case. It was a psychological game, and he was pulling the strings. A knock on the door broke his train of thought. Claire walked in, carrying a new stack of files. "We've got more information about the mysterious notes on the wall," she said, placing the files on the table. They're all excerpts from old articles. About you, Wilkins. Wilkins frowned. About me? Yes, they're all related to cases you've investigated. It seems this guy has been following you for a long time, Claire explained, her voice tinged with anxiety. A chill ran down Wilkins' spine. He had been followed? A series of old cases flashed through his mind, cases he had thought were closed. But now, they all seemed to have a strange connection, an eerie coincidence. Claire continued, "We also found something else in the victim's apartment, a USB drive." Wilkins looked up, his eyes brightening. USB? Have we checked its contents yet? Not yet. I think you should take a look first, Claire said, handing the USB drive to Wilkins. He plugged it into his computer, and the screen lit up. A video appeared, beginning with a dimly lit room, weak light emanating from a small lamp. In that room, a man sat quietly, his face obscured by shadows, but his voice was chillingly clear. "Hello, Wilkins, I know you're watching this video," the voice came slowly, each word accentuated with a haunting emphasis. "You thought everything would close, didn't you? But no, this game has only just begun. You cannot escape your past." Wilkins felt a shiver run down his spine. The killer knew too much about him, more than he could have imagined. "I won't stop until everything collapses before your eyes, Wilkins. Every piece you thought was safe will vanish. You can stop me, if you're smart enough. But remember, any mistake, no matter how small, will cost you dearly in blood." The video abruptly cut off, leaving Wilkins with thousands of questions swirling in his mind. This was no ordinary case anymore. This was a battle of wits, and the killer held all the cards. Wilkins stood frozen before the darkened screen, but his mind churned with chaotic thoughts. This killer was not just a ruthless murderer. He was intelligent, ruthless, and most importantly, he knew Wilkins' past well. That meant Wilkins could not let his guard down, could not allow any mistakes to surface. The killer was trying to break him down, not just by killing, but by dismantling his psyche. Wilkins turned to look at Claire, who stood there, waiting for his reaction. "We need to find him before more people die," Wilkins said, his voice resolute. "Do you think he's connected to your old cases?" Claire asked. "I'm not sure, but he knows more about me and my history. He's toying with me using the very cases I investigated," Wilkins replied. "We need to re-examine all cases related to the syndicate. That might be the key." Claire nodded, then quickly left, leaving Wilkins alone with the thoughts swirling in his mind. He wondered if he had inadvertently opened the door to this brutality, or if the killer was using him as a pawn in his game. Wilkins knew time was running out. Every next move would be crucial, for each mistake could lead to another innocent life lost. He picked up his phone and made a call. "I need to review all the old files on the syndicate and any related cases, especially those involving revenge or retaliatory actions." After hanging up, Wilkins sat quietly, his eyes fixated on the blank wall in front of him. He was facing a foe who was not just a mere killer. He was a master manipulator, intelligent enough to control others to his whim. And Wilkins knew that if he didn't uncover the truth soon, everything would collapse. Not just for him, but for all the innocent lives involved. In the days that followed, Wilkins and the investigative team continued to scour every lead about the syndicate. Documents and information that had been buried for so long came to light. This organization was not just a typical criminal group. It had ties to many powerful people in the city. Previous murder cases had likely been covered up, in part, by powerful underground forces. One late night, as Wilkins left the office, he felt something was off. He walked down the quiet street, his footsteps echoing in the night. Everything around him was too still. Then suddenly, from the shadows, he sensed someone was watching him. He stopped and turned, but there was no one there. The darkness enveloped everything, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. Wilkins' heart raced, every sense on high alert. He continued walking, this time quicker, but maintaining a facade of calm. If someone was indeed following him, he had to find a way to handle it. But what scared him most was that the killer might be closer than he thought. Wilkins hurried toward the car parked at the end of the street, his hand tightening around the gun in his jacket pocket. The darkness enveloped him, and he could feel the tension in the air tonight. His heart raced in his chest, each breath deeper, yet more labored with every echoing step on the empty pavement. Someone was watching him. This was almost certain. As Wilkins opened the car door, a chilling wind swept through, sending a shiver down his spine. A small light flickered from his phone. A new message. "Come back, Wilkins. Face it, or run forever." Wilkins stared at the screen, his heart momentarily stopping. He knew he was being tracked. The killer knew every move he made. There was no escaping it any longer. Wilkins turned around, his eyes scanning the darkness surrounding him. Any shadowy corner could hide the killer. Then in a narrow space near the alley, he spotted a figure. "Wilkins." The voice echoed from the darkness, elongated and mocking. "At last, we meet, don't we?" Wilkins stepped closer, his hand poised on the gun but not drawn. He wanted to see this man face to face, to understand why he had chosen him for this twisted game. "Come out of there. Stop hiding in the shadows," Wilkins said, his voice firm but tinged with tension. The figure stepped out from the dark corner, streetlight illuminating his pale face. He wasn't the killer Wilkins had expected. He wasn't tall, nor did he appear frightening in appearance. But his eyes, those dark, hate-filled eyes, told a different story. "I've been watching you for a long time, Wilkins. Every step you've taken, every case you thought you'd solved. But no, you're just covering it up. I am the vengeance of those souls. And now it's time for you to pay." Wilkins stared straight into his eyes, feeling the chaotic power and fanaticism in every word. He was not just a common killer. He was a man haunted, twisted by the past and fueled by hatred. "Who are you?" Wilkins asked, his grip tightening on the gun. "Who are you talking about?" The man laughed, a mad cackle echoing through the night. "You still don't understand, do you, Wilkins? The syndicate is just a part. But you are the real target. You sparked this war years ago." Wilkins flinched, pieces of a puzzle in his mind starting to connect. The past he thought he had forgotten suddenly came rushing back. The violent cases, the confrontations with those who belonged to a dark world. The syndicate had always lurked in the shadows, but who was this man before him in this story? "I can't die until you destroy everything. But don't worry, Wilkins. We will play more games until you are exhausted," he whispered, the tone sweet yet threatening. Wilkins felt the pressure mounting in his head. The killer was controlling the game, and Wilkins knew that to end this, he would have to do something he never wanted to. In a fleeting moment, Wilkins made his decision. He drew his gun, aiming it at the figure before him. But the man showed no fear. He laughed loudly, a haunting sound reverberating through the night. "Shoot, Wilkins, shoot, and you will become me." Wilkins raised the gun, but his hand trembled. The killer was trying to push him to his breaking point, trying to turn him into a monster, just like himself. Sweat trickled down Wilkins' forehead. This was not just a case, it was a psychological battle. If he shot, the killer would win, making Wilkins a part of his game. "Remember, Wilkins, you can never escape your past." Wilkins lowered the gun. He knew he couldn't let this man win on his terms. He didn't just want to kill him with bullets, but with the hatred that was creeping into Wilkins' soul. "I will end this, but not on your terms," Wilkins said, his voice steady. "You can watch me, but you cannot control me." The killer fell silent for a few seconds before bursting into laughter again, a sound filled with darkness and madness. "You've made your choice. I will return, Wilkins, and next time, you won't have the chance to choose again." He turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Wilkins standing there, in the stillness of the night, with an uncertain feeling about the future. The battle was not over yet, but Wilkins knew that whatever the outcome, he would not let this man control his life.